So everybody has an issue calling out low standards. Why? Because they want to be liked. When you see something and you don't say something, what's the reason you don't say it? Typically, people are afraid of conflict. So what happens when you have a low standard? Somebody doesn't do something they're supposed to. Somebody does it, but they don't do it right. Somebody doesn't do it at all. We typically let it go, and we think that we're being kind. The challenge is that we're allowing that person to continue the wrong behavior. They're going to continue to experience failure. Nobody wants to tell them something. Imagine you have something on your face or in your teeth, and nobody wants to tell you, and you're like, well, I don't want to be the bad guy, but by not telling you, that person looks bad. That's what happens when you don't call out a low standard. So anytime I get an opportunity to address something, I call it out. Now, a lot of people would say, man, that's because you're a jerk. That's because you're annoying. That's because you have high standards. That's because I want us to perform better. Now, what makes it a jerk is when you call it out in a jerk way, which do I ever do that? Absolutely not. I'm the most kind human being, of course I've done that oftentimes, and then I'll ask for apology, but I've worked on it over time of how to give constructive criticism, also how to take constructive criticism without being offended. And then find out, hey, is that true? Can I get better? Man, I need to get better. And recently I asked my guys and I said, hey, can you tell me, since you've worked with me for years, where are my blind spots? And I'm looking for feedback. And I'll take it from the people that work closest to me. And then, do I like hearing it? Absolutely not. Does anybody like hearing that immediately? No, right off the bat. But eventually you have to transform what you like hearing. And so if you can mature and you can say, hey, you know what? Man, this person is telling me something that can make me better. Why do I not like that? Why am I fighting that? And then you say, what's their motivation? Where are they coming from? Are they telling me that because they want to hurt me? Right? So that whole thing of like, be careful who you take advice from, which there's a whole other video on that. But if it's somebody that you trust, it's somebody you know, and you say, I trust this person. I know they mean good. Their feedback is sound. Then from there, you have to say, okay, I need to take this feedback. Now, some of us need to digest it, and maybe we need to build a better system for how we take criticism or how we take feedback. I know sometimes when I process something immediately and it hasn't digested, right, it's not the best. So today I'm a little bit more patient to say, okay, thanks for the feedback. Let me assess it. Then let me get back to you. That may be a day, a week, as long as you get back to that person. Now, if you don't, that person's going to say, hey, this person doesn't value my feedback whatsoever. So, maybe let me stop giving it. And you may not value their feedback, but it's, you probably shouldn't be getting feedback from those people. The people that you do value their feedback from, you should be incorporating it into your life and asking yourself, how can I get better? So let's go back to high standards. You see something that's not done right. Most people, because it takes more energy in that moment to say, hey, you know what? Let me give you some feedback on this. Or, hey, let me address how you did this. We don't want to put that energy into it. So what happens? They keep doing it at that low standard. Then somebody else watches that person do it at a low standard. What do? They duplicate the low standard. Then other people see that low standard. And what happens? Everybody then has a low standard because it wasn't corrected when it happened. So when do you call out a low standard? Immediately. From the moment that you realize it. You don't need to be rude, but you need to address it immediately. Sometimes my guys will say something to me and they're like, well, I didn't have enough time because of this and da-da-da-da-da-da. And a leader wants to buy that. Like, oh, yeah, okay, understanding. I want to be understanding. The problem is that you allow that person to believe that they cannot accomplish more, and now they believe that they have a limited capacity versus trying to say, how could you have accomplished that even though you had that responsibility? Push the envelope a little bit, right? How could you have accomplished that? How do successful people accomplish that? Hey, I know you're busy. Who's busier, you or Elon Musk? Elon Musk. So how does Elon do more with his time if you have the same amount of time? Let's process this. How can you be more effective? Now, if you're asking it from a place of anger, then it's really not going to be taken well. But if you're asking it from a place of processing, like, hey, I want to help you improve your capacity. Can I give you feedback? Yes. What's important there? Tonality, right? What's the tonality? I'm intense in the video, but when I'm processing with people, I don't have an intense tone, right? It's, hey, can I give you some feedback? Awesome. Listen, I want you to operate at your best capacity. I want you to be as successful as you can be. I want you to be as effective as you can be. I want you to win. I want you to excel. So I noticed that this happened, and I want to give you some feedback. Are you open to that? Yes. So you start with something good, then you address what happened, then you ask, can I give you some feedback? If that person says, no, I'm good, I don't want any feedback, that's not a person you want to invest into, right? Or partner with. They're not a team player. Most people say, yeah, I'm open to it. right? Especially if you package it the right way. And so, and then when you give that feedback, do you make a statement or do you ask a question? Hey, I noticed you did this. I think it could have been done better. What do you think you could have done better in that situation? Hey, how do you think we could have prepared better for this? Right? What advice? What areas of help do you need my help in for you to be able to perform better? And if you ask these questions and you help that person come up with the answer themselves, then they own the answer. So then they eventually, if you do this enough times, they start to understand that you have a high standard. So what happens when a low standard and a high standard meet? Either the high standard is going to drop to the low standard, which does not happen because that person has high standards, or the low standard is going to raise their standards to the high standard, or that person's going to be replaced with somebody who has higher standards. I've learned that most people want to be led and most people want a leader and most people want high standards, but it takes energy and we all have a capacity issue. So sometimes you may need additional support or they may need additional support. I have a lot of high standards, but I've also realized that, hey, in these areas, my expectations gone down because of my bandwidth. I don't have the bandwidth. So I have to accept a little bit mediocre work, or I have to accept a little bit delayed work. And I said, man, that's also an identity issue, which is a low standard. So how do you raise your standard? Well, hey, you got to invest into more resources, and then you got to improve people, and then you got to recruit or hire better people, which means you have to get better at interviews, which means you have to get better at training, which means you have to get better at onboarding. So there's things that you can do to raise that standard. And so when that happens and you help that person raise their standard, they are grateful. And if you do that consistently, and this is the part about consistency, there's not, well, I'm going to call it out sometimes, but I'm not going to call it out other times. Then you're teaching them to be inconsistent. So you don't have a high standard. But if you call it out every single time, respectfully, regardless of who it is, there's no favoritism in this. Well, I call him out, but I don't call her out. No, regardless. Now, some people will feel that way. Well, hey, why'd you call me out? You never call such and such out, right? Hey, I do call them out. I call them out in a different way. I call them out here. I call them out this. This occasion, this occasion, this occasion. Everybody's got the same standards. Oh, okay. Because oftentimes people measure how themselves based on how you treat them, based on how they see you treat other people. And if you are that person, by the way, that does have different standards for other people, then that's also an issue. I've also had conversations with leaders behind the scenes where I'm like, hey, I don't want to call you out publicly because it reduces your credibility with the audience or with the team or with the other leaders in the office. So I need you to set a better example because you're elevated on such a higher standard. You're elevated on this, hey, this is the standard. So when you drop the ball, right, you make it acceptable for everybody else because you've been edified and introduced as the standard. So it's important if you're that leader and somebody's giving you that responsibility or you have that responsibility or you hold that position or you have that influence, it's very important for you to know that you are the standard for other people around you. And ultimately, all of us are the standard for everybody around us. Our spouse, our kids, our business partners, anybody that we deal with, there is a standard. And I will tell you, don't think that you're perfect. You are never perfect. You can always get better. So don't think, well, man, I'm high and mighty, I'm the standard. You are low standard to somebody else's high standard, right? Your high standard is somebody else's low standard. There's like, you right? You say, hey, you know what, man? I'm making $100,000 a year. Well, you're the top of the bottom of people making 20, 30, 40,000. Right? You're above. But to somebody that's making $1 million, 100,000 is you're at the bottom of the journey, right? Somebody, man, I'm making $1 million. Well, yeah, you're at the bottom for somebody who makes $1 million a month. Like, that's not a lot. So there's always a new standard, and you should be seeking in your life not perfection, because it'll drive you crazy, because I've done that, and it's annoying, by the way. You're annoyed. You're annoying to other people. So this whole thing of like perfection is not expected. That was something that I learned from my mentor, but progress is. Perfection is not an expectation, but progress is, right? You can make a mistake one time, totally acceptable, right? Unless it's a mistake like, values, morals, values, principles. Those things are not acceptable. And people make them, and we're understanding, and there's a whole process of forgiveness and trust that needs to be rebuilt. But you can make a mistake one time, but you can't make it twice, because then it's not a mistake. Now it's a habit, right? So, guys, I want to challenge you. It takes a lot of energy to build something great, because everybody wants to be comfortable and casual, and you're chasing excellence. You're chasing this dream, this vision, this big old goal. And in order to accomplish that, you're going to have to raise everybody around you to collectively get better. So you're that standard. And if you can become that leader, people will be grateful for you. And eventually, here's what happens about the standards, because people say, man, that means I'm going to have to do that forever. Eventually, the culture becomes the standard. And other people make sure that that expectation, that standard is continued on. So it's your job to create it, right? To set it, to model it, to hold it accountable, to sustain it. But eventually the culture takes that over. And then collectively, if you have a lot of other leaders, they raise that standard even higher than your standard. And that's how we keep making progress in every single organization, business, church, family, country, in every single aspect of our life. We can all raise the standard. So take an inventory. What are 2, 3, 4, 5 things I could do right now to raise the standards in my marriage, to raise the standards in my health, to raise the standards in my personal development, to raise the standards in my financial map, my financial wealth accumulation plan, my relationships, my leadership, my sales ability? What are a few things? What are the areas that are most important to you? And pick 2, 3 things that you can do to raise that standard, and then do that for 90 days. And here's what's going to happen. People are going to come up to you 90 days later and they're going to say, hey man, what are you doing? What's going on? Lately, I've noticed you're just different. And it's a whole different level of expectation and standard and energy around you. And man, I'm like, I got to raise my standards. And you'll see that you'll end up helping other people do the same. Hope this helps you raise your standards. Comment below, like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you on the next video, everybody. Take care.